If you're thinking about buying a home in Kansas City, this video is an absolute must watch. There are millions of very boring and simple guides on the internet, but the problem, none of them talk about how to do it while prices keep going up and while there's a housing shortage. And both of those are extremely important right now because a lot of home buyers are finding themselves in bidding wars, overpaying for properties, waiving inspections, and exposing themselves to tens of thousands of dollars of out-of-pocket expenses. Now, we have poured our heart and souls into a series of charts that are extremely out there. Jordan's here to rein me in, but our hope is that this puts you in the best position to gain an upper hand in the current Kansas City real estate market. The first one on the screen, like what in the world are we looking at here? It's two opposite ends of the spectrum when buying a house in Kansas City, two completely different mindsets. And the first one is the mindset of waiting for the market to crash. And Jordan, this guy just looks defeated.
Yeah, it's super sad. He's got the stick, poking the Zillow sign, just waiting on home prices to come down. And with this mindset, it really leaves people unhappy in their current homes. And then maybe even they had an opportunity to buy a home but decided to wait. Or this is a real thing. People were selling their homes in 2019 on speculation, and now they're renting because they couldn't find a home to buy. And maybe even they thought high rates would cause prices to drop. But unfortunately, I mean, rates have gone up and so have home prices, and they continue to rise. And then also the YouTube comments, Nick.
That's right. We usually see this mindset manifest in comments on our market update videos. Things like, "Whoa, I wish the market would just collapse already." And unfortunately, the data is not pointing in that direction. And as much as I like to take advantage of opportunity when I see it, we also have to face the facts. But the other end of the spectrum is getting into the bidding wars. We spoke a little bit about this, but there's this scene in South Park. I don't know if we've got any fans out there, but it says, "Here's a house in your price range," and then the scene from South Park, and it's gone as soon as it's listed. And usually this mindset, a lot of the time it results in people getting into bidding wars, potentially losing, feeling like they need to overcompensate on the next property, even if the situation doesn't warrant it. And we've got just a brutal example to show you here in the next couple minutes. Sometimes it's their agent telling them to increase their offer. There's a time and a place when this is justified. We're going to show you what that definitive threshold looks like. And then a lot of the time it results in still not getting into a property because every time they find one, they're competing against like 10 to 15 other home buyers. Or maybe they win that bidding war and they've risked overpaying for the property, waiving an inspection, and possibly tens of thousands of dollars in repairs that another seller may have been willing to complete. But Jordan, really the purpose of this video, how can we strike that balance in the middle where we're neither of those extremes? And most of this just revolves around saying no to competition.
Yeah, no to competition. We want to eliminate that as much as possible. So we know that prices are going to keep rising, but we're going to structure the home search in a way that finds the right deal for our buyers and try to mitigate the bidding war situation. We're also going to reverse engineer the home buying process to protect the negotiating power for our buyers.
Or you could just buy new construction, but that's what all of our other videos are about. So this one is mostly about how to buy a pre-existing home because that is really the tough challenge in this current market. Now on the screen is the step-by-step process of buying a home in Kansas City. We're going to split this into 3 sections. The best one of this video is at the end, but it won't make sense unless you see the first and second. So we're going to start with part 1, which is purchasing power. All the articles online, they say go hire a lender, get your pre-approval letter, and you are good to go. The problem is they leave out a lot of these steps that can save you a lot of money, allow you to negotiate from a better position, and keep your monthly payment as low as possible. Jordan, the first one is to hire a local lender.
Yeah, so local lenders here in Kansas City, they're going to have an understanding of our market. They may even know some of these listing agents on these properties we're going after. And it just makes your offer more legitimate when the listing agent or the seller knows that there's a person on the other end of the line that they can get a hold of, especially when compared to like a national lender where you may get shuffled around to different departments and different loan officers.
Yeah, one key difference is you're almost never going to get a hold of a national lender on the weekends, and that's where a lot of these scenarios go down unless you watch part number 2. But the reason this matters is because when you write an offer, Most buyers and most of their lenders are not calling the listing agent to vouch for those buyers, but we want to make sure that yours does and that they communicate, I'm a real person. You can get a hold of me if anything goes wrong. Two is, I know listing agent and seller, I know you're taking on risk with whatever offer you accept. Your local lender is saying, my buyer is very qualified to buy this property. We're going to make sure this closes. That immediately creates a lot more trust. It makes them feel more confident accepting your offer. And it could mean that they choose your offer because they know it's going to close, even if it's not the highest offer. Now, the second one is that a lot of the time people only go with one lender. And we think it's important to shop multiple different lenders, even if you have a favorite. And this is how we guarantee that our clients get the best terms and the best rate.
Yeah, that's right. And there's a lot of different programs that every lender runs. They're all different. And one example is going to be the float down option. Now, if you go under contract on a property, the lender is going to want you to lock in your rate in case rates go up. But what if rates go down? If you have the float down option, it allows you to adjust that interest rate to whatever the rate is at the time before you close.
That's right. And that difference, a lot of agents don't know about it, a lot of home buyers don't know about it. That can make a big impact on that monthly mortgage payment, especially when rates are as volatile as they are right now. We've got clients where that float down option was just exercise. It's going to save them quite a bit in their payment. The next one is a lot of lenders right now, because they know what's holding a lot of people on the sidelines from buying a home is those high rates. They're offering low cost refinance options. That could be the difference between thousands versus a little bit less when you go to refinance down the road and rates have decreased. Then finally, there are quite a few different terms. One big one that you'll see come up is private mortgage insurance. This essentially applies whenever the down payment amount is less than 20%. It's insurance that protects the lender, certainly not you. It never really protects you in these instances, protects the lender in case you default or you don't make payments on the loan. There are different lenders where if you put 15% down, you might not have to pay private mortgage insurance, which could be an extra few $100s a month. And then finally, we're going to get to the real big one that you need to know about in a second. One that always comes up is down payment amounts anywhere between 5 to 10% is pretty common. A lot of people are at 20% because of that private mortgage insurance. Credit scores always come up, Jordan.
Yeah, credit scores. So it's a very hot topic. Really, it only matters if your score is below 740. But once you get above 740, you're really maxed out on the rate and term that you can get.
Yeah, so that's really the first thing. If you're not at 740, we want to make sure we're there so you're not paying extra interest to the bank more than you need to. Then finally, like this is the golden key that a lot of people miss is having a fully underwritten pre-approval letter. What that means, we'll use the example of if you go under contract to purchase a home, the normal process is once that purchase agreement is signed by everybody, that's when most lenders will start the underwriting process. They'll go back through, they'll check all of the employment, the income, they'll make sure that they can actually fund that loan. What we like to do is we take that process and we do it in the beginning while you get pre-approved before you even start shopping for homes. Best case scenario, it allows us to act a little bit quicker. But worst case scenario, it makes your pre-approval letter that much more credible. Again, doesn't matter how much somebody's willing to offer to pay for a property if they can't close on it. These are the strategies you can use, even if you're not writing the highest purchase price, to still get an accepted offer.
Before we move on to part number 2, which is the home search strategy, in case we haven't met yet, my name's Jordan.
My name's Nick, and we help people buy homes all over the Kansas City suburbs. A lot of our content on YouTube is about new construction, but when it comes to buying a pre-existing home, being able to negotiate, being able to avoid competition is by far your best friend. If you like anything we have to say here, this is just a fraction, it's scratching the surface of what we do for our clients. We'd love to show you all the cards that we've got up our sleeves. So give us a phone call, text message, email, and we'd be happy to set you up for success. Part number 2 is the home search strategy. Now we got to start by calling out the elephant in the room, and that's, do you hire a real estate agent or do you not? We're obviously biased, so we're not going to take a position. If you enjoy it, if you find this helpful at all, you know how to get a hold of us. If you hate real estate agents, I understand we're difficult people to difficult industry to work with. If you want to represent yourself, use homes.com. It'll show you the listing agent's phone number. You don't even have to deal with the buyer's agent. That's all your decision to make. We would just recommend making that decision before you start the whole lender process because it makes it all easier. Second reason we bring this up is because in the beginning of the video, we talked about this competition mindset, the idea that you have to go in guns blazing, you have to write as big of an offer as you can, waive the inspection, cover an appraisal gap. That impacts agents as well. And if you're going to hire a real estate agent, you want to make sure that the agent's not pushing you to pay more for a property than what this situation warrants. The reason I say it that way is because we have just a brutal example that haunts me every single time I hear about an agent getting into a bidding war and what they got their client to sacrifice in order to win that home. We just have a different approach to handling competition and navigating this market. We're not calling anybody out specifically, but here's the example. This was a listing of mine, so I represented the home seller. We listed at $565,000. The house was on the market for 7 days. We had some interest, but we didn't have any offers. We saw lots of showings, but nobody put pen to paper. It's a sign that the price was too high. We received one offer and my jaw hit the floor. This was ultimately my responsibility, right? I told them, hey, this is the price we should list it at. And we got a low ball of $530,000. Now I have to explain that to the sellers. Hey, we think the property's worth this. They're 35,000 under that. It also had a quick deadline. So this is just a brutal play by the buyers, and I respect the heck out of it. They give us 2 hours to decide. Luckily, we were never gonna take that offer. But we knew that there was another agent who had clients interested. They were actually writing an offer at the exact same time. So I called up that agent. I said, hey, we've got another offer on the table. We're going to have to make a decision very, very quickly here. Do you intend on writing? And they said, yes. I didn't know you had another offer. Let me see if I can get my clients up a little bit so we can win this house. They really like it. That offer came in. Jordan, you know what it came in at?
Full list price.
Full list. Well, it's on the screen. So yeah, that was a dead giveaway. 565. It came in at full list price, $35,000 above what we had in our hand. And this was simply because the agent believed the market was really competitive. They negotiated their own client up. And again, this haunts me every single time that I hear about somebody getting into a bidding war, etc. It's kind of like a game of Battleship. You never know where the other cards on the table lie. And if you assume competition is taking place, it's going to cost you a ton of money. And it's even worse if the person you hired to protect you from that is the one incentivizing all of it.
Now, one of the first things that we need to do when we get your home search set up is assess the market competition. There's several different ways that we can do that. One of them is our eyes and ears in the field. What are we actually seeing? How many people are walking through these properties the same time we are? But Nick, we can jump into the data. We can pull this from our MLS. Now, this chart here on the screen, this is just Overland Park. We can actually break this down by zip code, the city that you're looking at. And if you zoom in there, Nick, I mean, the average number of showings there is about 20
Yeah,
for all those price ranges.
Yeah, but you find these hot spots where, Overland Park, a lot of people are looking at it for those Blue Valley schools, 475 to under 500. Jordan, we've got 45 plus average showings per listing.
A ton of showings.
But then you hop over 500 and all the way up to 550, and all you've got are like 8 to 12 showings per listing. That's a massive difference in competition.
Yeah, so with that data in mind, it's like, hey, maybe that's the price bracket we need to be looking in that area.
So having this info, being able to do this for your specific suburbs, the zip codes you might be looking in, the price ranges, we can get this narrowed down so finely that you know exactly what to avoid and also what to pursue, like some of those hot spots. Jordan, the second one is we can look at comparable neighborhoods.
Yeah, so if you're flexible on where you want to live in the city, many of the suburbs have very comparable amenities and a big difference in price ranges and their level of competition for homes right now. We've made several videos on pretty much all the suburbs of Kansas City, so we'll link them in the description below. Feel free to give them a watch.
Now, the final thing is you can find good deals in any market. The first example, this is a boring one. I know all of you already know this, but days on market, as soon as the property's listed, it becomes a depreciating asset. That's why that example where somebody came in and paid way more than they probably needed to, every single day that house was on the market, I was getting more and more worried because your chances of getting a good offer plummet tremendously. Now, that's why the longer properties on the market, the chances that you have to negotiate a good deal go up as well. It's not to say you're not going to run into a bidding war. It's possible, even on a property that's on the market for 7 days. It's just highly unlikely. And then finally, overpriced properties. This is an overlooked one because I know you've all, like, for example, you'll see these homes that go on the market that are like obviously worth like $400,000, but they're listed at 350 because that agent knows they're going to get a way more showings if they list it at 350. They're probably going to sell for like 415, 420, something like that. So they're deliberately underpricing the property. They get all the eyeballs. The opposite also happens where sellers want more than the property's worth. And look at what happens there, Jordan. 30% of the buyers are actually looking at those homes. They're missing 70% of the market.
Yeah, and on some of those properties, the sellers, especially in this market, they might be willing to negotiate. They're getting anxious. They think their property should have gone under contract by now, and it's not.
Yep. And the worst that they could say is no. You obviously don't want to lowball and insult them, but there are some good opportunities out there, especially because we know for a fact that most people in the market will never even go and see them in the first place. Now, those are some of the more obvious strategies you can use. This one I feel like is pretty obvious, but most people don't follow it. It's called the weekend test. And this is the chart that I'm the most proud of. I individually changed the colors of all of those. Anyway, Monday through Sunday, okay? There are periods in the week that are more competitive when you're more likely to run into a bidding war, and also ones where it's far less likely. Most people are looking at homes Friday through Sunday, right? Because it's the weekend, they've got more time off work, they have more time to handle negotiating a real estate transaction. That's why a lot of properties will go live on Friday. The problem is the best ones are usually have a couple offers by Saturday or Sunday, and they're under contract by Sunday or Monday. So the most competitive days of the week to submit an offer to go look at properties are definitionally going to be Friday through Sunday. The reason you've got the yellow, some properties might go live on a Thursday, some properties might not be under contract until Monday. This is more of our safer zone. Jordan, way less competitive if the property survives the weekend.
Yeah, so if we can get past the weekend with one of these properties, we want to go look at it Monday through Thursday. And if it's a hot property or something that you like, we need to submit that offer before the weekend and the next onslaught of showings.
And the key there is to put them on a deadline, like I told you about in that example, but not that ruthless. We'll give them more than a couple hours. We'll show you that in part number 3. Fewer people are looking at homes during that time. And that's why if you write a fairly good offer that comes in just close enough to that list price, and there's nothing else on the table, good chance the seller just said, yes, let's get this over with. If it survives the weekend, really good possibility you're not going to find yourself in bidding wars, but it's always possible. Now, if you followed all of those steps, you're probably going to see more options where you're less likely to run into competition, which makes this next philosophy a little easier to do. And that's to say no to competing, say no to bidding wars. There's a time and a place, but if we walk through a property, it's just hit the market, there are a bunch of people walking in and out of it, we know it's going to go day one. The threshold for considering writing an offer should be very high.
Yeah, so it needs to be a 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10, check all of your boxes. And then, if you're not up against a deadline, it might be best just to keep looking.
Yeah, especially if you're early on in the home search. It's really easy to get sucked into these bidding wars. It becomes emotional, a bit of a game, and that's not a place you want to make decisions from, especially with hundreds of thousands of dollars or million worth of real estate. And then finally, nobody wants to be the one who's willing to pay the most for a property. That's why saying no eliminates the risk of getting into a bidding war from the get-go, but there's always a time and place. So if you're up against a deadline, if you've been looking at homes for a while, there's a point where you don't want to seek perfection. There's no such thing as perfection, but at the same time, if you see a 9 out of 10 property compared to everything else you've seen, sometimes it will make sense to go after it.
Yeah, and there's a few questions that we need to ask ourselves. Is this a rare type of property that we're not going to see one like it for the next 3 or 4 months? And is there room in your budget to compete if that's what we think we have to do? And then the next thing, I mean, are there any big ticket repair items for this home, such as the roof, the foundation, and all the HVAC equipment? Because those can add up very, very quickly.
This is one thing we screen before we even schedule a showing at a property. We can find it in the seller's disclosure. And then when we're walking through with clients, we're looking foundation. Is there anything going on with the siding? Is there are there water stains on the ceiling that haven't been corrected? There are a lot of things we can scope out right from the get-go. We can pretty much get a better idea. Is it worth competing over this? Or is it just a lot of emotion, a lot of people walking through the property that makes us feel like we need to compete for it? And that brings us to the last resort, when a bidding war is the only option. We've exhausted everything else and the property meets that threshold we just discussed. We're going to give you an overview of these things that you can do to make your offer more attractive and win a bidding war. It depends on the situation. We're going to put them into context here in part number 3. But Jordan, the first one is an escalation clause.
Yeah, the escalation clause. So you offer $500,000 on a home, but you have an escalation clause that takes you up to 510, and it's going to go up there in increments against any other competing offers.
Yeah, so it essentially says if another offer is received that's above your initial of 500, yours automatically increases in $1,000 increments to the limit. So this means you don't have to keep writing offer after offer if you hear that you're not the top dog. Second one is timeline. This is a big deal. It matters to a lot of sellers. If you can be flexible on timeline, it could win you the deal. We've seen it dozens and dozens of times. Sometimes the seller wants a delayed close. Maybe they need some time to find their next property. Sometimes they want a faster close. In part number 1, we discussed getting your pre-approval letter fully underwritten, which means you're ready to hit the ground running, and you might be able to make that happen. The third is some sellers may want a rent back, which we'll explain what that means in part number 3. Another example, Jordan, is a pre-offer inspection.
Yeah, so if we have enough notice when it comes time to show this property, we can get our inspector to walk through it with us and do a pre-offer inspection. Now, it's not going to be as detailed as the inspection would be while we're under contract, but it can give us a better idea on whether or not we may be able to waive any inspections in the contract.
Yep. Now, there's obviously going to be some cost to that. But again, if this is like the unicorn property, you've got to have it. We got to make something happen here. This would be the safer way to purchase it as is if you've already got the inspection done before you even go under contract. This just is a situational one. You want to use it sparingly. It's not something you go to every showing with an inspector. Covering the appraisal gap. We don't like this one. In fact, we have a lot of tools to make sure you avoid this from the get-go. But this means if the house doesn't appraise, so let's say somebody's offered $550 on a property and it appraises at $530, well, there's a $20,000 gap there. And that essentially means if there's an appraisal gap and the buyer's willing to cover it, they're going to come out of pocket an additional $20,000, cover the difference between what the bank thinks the property's worth and what they've offered to pay for it. Now, one way that we make sure you don't have to worry about appraisal issues is we do what's called a price trend analysis. This is actually one we did for one of our clients before they wrote an offer, and it's blacked out because I'm not going to leak their private information and address. But what we do is we essentially look, this is an algorithm. It's very similar to what stock traders on Wall Street use to predict the future trends of their assets, but it's just geared towards real estate. So we look at sales in the last 12 months, we look at sales 6 months ago, and sales that happened in the last 30 days that are currently under contract, put it into this guy, it spits out a price trend analysis. And in this example, it spit out 564 to 665. The actual appraised value is 662. So we were right on the money on the high side. Now, the reason this matters, it's a step beyond what most agents do. Most agents are looking at the last 90 days or so, but because we have 3 layers of data, we're able to create a trend, make sure there aren't any appraisal issues. And then the final one, you got to see it for this to make sense. It's in its present condition.
Yeah, and so what that means is you're going to accept the property with no repairs being asked for, and there's several different ways to do it. Some of it is with inspections and without, but we'll get into that later in the video.
Then moving on to part number 3, it's all about negotiation. The home buying process, we talked about agents, the pre-approval process, how to look for homes and set up that home search. How to identify the one? Is it worth fighting for in the first place if competition seems likely? And then we talked a little bit about how to compete and write an offer in one of those situations, but now we want to really put it into context. So we're going to show you an actual purchase agreement because a lot of the things that we just discussed are kind of theoretical. I know we made a bunch of charts and went crazy, but until you see the real thing, it's just hard to really visualize. So this is, if you want to write an offer on a home in Kansas City, you found the one. This is most likely the paperwork you're going to see if you're working with most agents in Kansas City. And we're going to scroll through quite a bit of this. We're going to cover the big parts. There's a link at the top of the description. All of our notes are there. You can look at these annotated agreements yourself and really put you in a pretty good position instead of, seeing these for the first time when you're like in the middle of an offer situation, which is how it works with most home buyers in Kansas City. So we're going to scroll down a little bit. The first page is all about the purchase price and the terms of the offer.
Yeah, so that first big red box there at the top, that's the purchase price line. That's where you're going to write how much you want to pay for this property. And the next thing is the earnest money. Now, typically in Kansas City, 1% earnest money down on pre-owned homes. That money is going to go to the title company and be held in escrow. And we always like to check refundable. I wouldn't advise going non-refundable, but you might do that in a real competitive situation.
Possibly. When it comes to buying a new construction home, a couple differences that we always like to point out. That money's not going to the title company, it's going to the builder, and it's almost always going to be non-refundable. But the reason refundable is important is because there are contingencies which are baked into this contract to protect you unless you waive them. And we're going to break down what that looks like. You can always put additional earnest money down. Let's say you decide it's a competitive situation. You do want to inspect, but you want to assure the seller that you plan to follow through and purchase the property, not just beat them up on price. Maybe you say after inspections, we're going to put another $5,000 down on the property. Could make a difference. Most of the time, it's not going to. You've got the total amount financed by the buyer, which is really just the loan amount, balance of purchase price and certified funds, which is really just the cash you need to bring to closing table. And of course, you're also going to have closing costs on top of that. This box, seller compensation, a broker assisting buyer. This is where we ask the seller to compensate the buyer's agent. This is part of the negotiation now. In the past, the seller and listing agent decided how much the buyer's agent would get paid without any conversation with the buyer. Now the buyer and the buyer's agent get to make this decision for themselves. So it gives you a little bit more control. If you get a credit, this is the box it goes in. And Jordan, two big differences often misunderstood. There's a close date, and then there's the date possession changes.
Yeah, so the closing date, that's when all the documents are signed, the funds are transferred over to the seller from the buyer, and you take ownership. But the possession date could be that same day. Normally it is, but in certain situations, it may be delayed a few days after closing. That way, it gives the seller time to move out in case they need time to get into their new home.
We've used this on a number of occasions. We had one client that was buying a house in the Blue Valley School District. We knew the seller needed some days in the house after closing. So this is something that we did offer them just to make our offer more attractive. Now, we didn't come in at list price. We came in well below that, but to a seller who needs more time in a property, if you give them funds up front, it could mean that you have to pay quite a bit less because now you're taking on more risk. But if you're comfortable with that, it could make a lot of sense and get you a much better deal. The appraised value contingency just means a protection for you. If it doesn't appraise, then you've got a backstop, you've got an out, you can walk away. You can go back to the seller and say, hey, we want to renegotiate, or you can agree to pay the gap between the appraised value and what you offered to purchase the property for. Again, we talked about our price trend analysis. This oftentimes is never an issue. In fact, we have the opposite happen, where a lot of the time the property appraises above what our clients are willing to pay for it. The sale contingency, it's a complicated one. We're not going to go into a lot of detail. Sometimes a buyer will offer to purchase a property on the condition that their property is sold first. It's happened. We've even had clients that are relocating here who had to sell two different homes in two different states that were contingent on purchasing here in Kansas City. It gets more complicated, but it is doable. Jordan, we've got financial terms.
Yeah, so this is where you're going to mark whether or not it's a cash sale or a finance sale. And if it is a finance sale, this is where we fill out the terms of your loan, the type of loan it is, and the type of interest rate you're going to have. And it has to match what you're doing. It can be changed later in the contract, but we have to notify the seller in writing, and there's timelines involved.
The reason we're going over all of this is because all of these are ways you can make your offer more attractive. If you find yourself in a bidding war scenario, these are levers you can pull. It all depends on the situation. This next box is buyer is pre-approved. You need that pre-approval letter to even for your offer to even be considered as legitimate. There are some instances in which that might not be the case, so you can get approved after an offer is accepted. But in this market, you want to make sure you're telling the seller, we have the funds and the financing lined up to purchase the property. We're going to scroll down all the way. Inspections. This is a big one. It's going to come up here in just a second. Sometimes people will go back and forth when maybe the seller counters the offer and reduces the inspection window to save their time. This all matters. This is the main spot here is how long does the buyer have during the inspection contingency? There's also a wood destroying insects clause. That's a whole separate thing. But really, and when it comes to an inspection, let's say something's found, there's an unacceptable condition. There are three choices. You can accept the property and move forward. You can cancel the contract, or you can offer the seller to renegotiate. And again, you can have counter offers and counter offers on the renegotiation of inspection items as well. If we scroll down even more, the final thing, my favorite, it is my favorite part of this contract, is the expiration date in time, because you can do a lot of damage with this if you do it right. If you come in really close to somebody's threshold and you just give them not something like 30 minutes or 2 hours, but if you give them a slightly reasonable amount of time instead of like 48 hours, if you give them like 12 to 24, it could do it for you. Now, we've had that happen in several instances. Now, we brought up a couple different things that you could do. These are the most common ones to see. This is what happens when somebody waives their inspection. Oftentimes, there are three different boxes they can check. We have color coordinated these from like safe-ish to not safe at all, like you're taking on a lot of risk. The green essentially says that you could go ahead and inspect, and you can go ahead and walk away if you don't find that inspection satisfactory, but you cannot ask the seller to make repairs. This is the safest way to go if you're going to purchase a property as is. I still don't recommend. I like to negotiate. I like to negotiate on repairs, and I think you can do it if you set your home search up right. Jordan, the box in the middle.
Yeah, so box number 2, that's going to be as is. You can still inspect, but it's for your information purposes only, and there's no ability to back out. And then we have the red box, box number 3. So you are waiving inspections entirely and taking it as is. And that's the most risky box you can check.
Yep. My dad's a builder. When we buy a property just for the purpose of tearing it down, we're checking box 3 because we don't care what's inside the property. Sometimes flippers, etc. Sometimes if you've pre-inspected the property before writing an offer, but these are the danger zone. You have no ability to walk away without damages, which could be the deposit. They could also sue you for specific performance. That is a nasty game that you don't want to get into. And the final one that we want to show you, this can really become a tool if you do get into a bidding war. It's the escalation clause. All real estate agents may have a different version of this. But let's give you an example. It says, if you have submitted an offer, seller receives another one that's a little bit higher, your offer automatically increases in increments of X up to Y. So here's what that looks like. Let's say you offer $450,000 and you don't want to keep writing offers. You also don't want the rug pulled out from under you and lose the opportunity to win this house. This says the purchase price would increase in increments of $1,000 up to a max offer of $465. This is based on the net purchase price. So it factors in concessions, everything like that. They can't simply say, oh, we have an offer and never disclose that. They have to disclose that other offer to you. Now, here's the example, 450. If the seller receives a competing offer with a net of 455, your new offer with this escalation clause automatically becomes 456. And again, there are instances where if you submit just one offer without this, the rug could be pulled out from under you. You might not have an opportunity to come back to the table and give your best and final. Now, that was a really quick overview of writing an offer. There's a lot of information there. That's why there's a whole annotated thing and all of our notes linked at the top of the description. You can access it for free. But those are all the levers you can pull to make your offer stronger. Those are some of them. There are plenty more where that came from, but we got to keep some secrets up our sleeve here. Final part of this is what can the seller do in response? They can counter it, they can ignore it, they can let it expire, or they can accept it. We like when they counter it because usually it means that they're willing to play ball and negotiate with you. And that's where we do some fun things like ask for the washer and dryer, the TVs, some furniture. It all just depends on the situation. But let's say you get that offer accepted, whatever terms, whatever combination you feel is necessary. At that point, we go ahead, we set up two things: inspections. If you have not waived your right to inspect, we go ahead and set those up. Second, Jordan, we read it in the contract, the earnest money
Yeah, you
deposit.
got to do the earnest money. Typically, it's 3 days. It can be adjusted, it can be changed in the contract, but typically 3 calendar days. It's got to be submitted to the title company. Otherwise, that seller may say, I'm out.
That's right. And then after those things have been completed, you'll get the inspection report back. No home is perfect. We have a no nitpicking rule. If there's chipped paint somewhere, we're not going to the seller and asking them to fix the chipped paint. If the HVAC, the water heater, the furnace, the roof, the structure of the house, serious issues, that's what we're going to spend our negotiating capital on. This is also why you want to set your home search up from the beginning to avoid competition. If you get in these bidding war scenarios, let's say you get your offer accepted, but you're in this competition mindset, you're going to feel pretty weak when it comes to asking the seller to do those things. We've had deals, even in some of the hottest areas, where we've had like $20,000 plus worth of repairs done on a property before closing just because we played our cards right. So that's what I would encourage you to do. You've got time. The contract will specify how long you have to renegotiate. Same process. The seller could accept, decline, you can meet in the middle, or you can agree to just walk away from the property.
Now, once we get through the inspection period, we're going to call the lender and say, hey, go ahead and call in, order in the appraisal. And once that comes back, if it comes in high, great, nothing to worry about. But if it comes in below the purchase price offer, then there's a couple of options. And it's really the ability to walk away or the ability to renegotiate.
That's right. And then after that, we're pretty much in the clear. We want to make sure any repairs that needed to be done are actually done. Sometimes we call the inspector back out to re-inspect. We recommend that. Second is there's a final walkthrough. We want to make sure the property's in the same condition it was in when you initially wrote your offer, that they haven't damaged anything while moving, that the seller hasn't taken a bunch of things that were fixed to the property and included in the contract, and that if they have, that we have a mechanism to resolve that before you end up closing. After that, it's just going to the closing appointment, bringing your cash to close, and being ready to sign your life away. Because if you finance, the stack of documents is like this big. It all depends. But that's all we've got for this video. Questions about buying a home in the Kansas City suburb? We would love to hear from you. I know this was a long video. There's a lot of information. A lot of this is linked at the top of the description if you want to refer back to it. But if you found it helpful, we'd love to put this to practice on your behalf and really make it specific to your situation. So phone call, text message, email, we'd be happy to help. There are going to be a couple videos on the screen. This is the video YouTube thinks you would enjoy the most. We're going to link our most recent market update video right here. So click there or here. We'll see you on the next one.